So just to note, this is 1 hour and it is being recorded. So I'd like to kick it off with some introductions. And I'd like to hand it over first to Dr. Marc Bekoff, who is the heart and inspiration for this event, to share more about his work about rewilding and everything else he's done in his life.
Oh, don't put any pressure on me, India.
No pressure.
Well, thanks for
Great.
doing this, and thanks for all of you to be here. Just a little background. I taught at CU Boulder for years, courses in animal behavior and conservation biology and animal protection. And so that was just sort of what I did. I've done a lot of research on carnivores. I studied not alone, but with a group of students and postdocs, coyotes for 8.5 years in the Grand Teton National Park. And I did some work on the wolves in Yellowstone, and I studied penguins in Antarctica. They don't all look the same. They all have very unique personalities, by the way. And I'm really a champion of a field called compassionate conservation. And the basis of compassionate conservation is simply that the life of every single individual matters, and basically killing other individuals is off the table, either for the good of their species or other species, because they have intrinsic or inherent value. And I think about it in terms of rewilding, because I've spent a lot of time outside, and I think these issues about rewilding have been brewing in whatever is left of my brain for many, many years. And I'll talk about that maybe a little later, but basically rewilding to me means, if you will, reconnecting and maintaining connections with nature. And in a book I wrote called Rewilding Our Hearts, I really think it begins with the person themselves. You rewild your heart and let your heart direct you. Forget about what other people say. You may be crazy and go talk to trees, and you may talk to the animals, or I talk to my stuffed animals. But just getting off your butt, going out. And in Colorado, it's just so easy to do. I mean, no matter where you live, you're not that far away from beautiful landscapes. And rewilding can just be rewilding with flora or fauna. But the basis for it, to me, is recognizing how much we have, being proactive, because if we wait to be reactive, there may not be anything to rewild. And I'm an optimist, but you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind's blowing, as Bob Dylan said. We're losing landscapes and animals and environments. And the only other thing I'll say is that when I go to conservation and environmental meetings, I always have to remind at least half the people that animals, by the way, are part of the environment. So anyway, I'm sure we'll revisit that, but I'm really thrilled to be here with you all.
Thank you, Marc. Now I'm going to hand it over to Marlon.
Thanks so much, India, and hi, everyone tuning in. For anyone who I haven't met, which is a lot of people, my name is Marlon Reis. I'm the first gentleman of Colorado. What that means is that my partner is the governor. And so I have dedicated the last 6 years to working on animal protection, much like my good friend Marc mentioned before. And I don't like to box myself in. And so, what that means for me is actually helping animals and working on protecting animals from the smallest to the largest, and acknowledging that each individual life matters, much as Marc mentioned. And also acknowledging that every animal, every plant exists within a whole, and nothing exists in isolation. And so trying to find the ways that animals are connected to one another, and the way that they're connected to us and connected to the environment is a chief motivator in the work that I've done. So I have 2 more years left in this role before the new governor, whoever that happens to be, takes over. And I'm hoping that conservation is also a key part of that administration's work. But prior to this current role, I was a congressional spouse for 10 years in the US Congress. And there I also championed animal protection. And so it's just been a treat. I'm an avid and eager student, and I love learning from lots of different people. I have many questions I always send to Mark. Anytime I have a science question, I always ask the experts. So anyway, I'm so happy to be here tonight and to have a great conversation.
Thanks so much, Marlon. We're really, really excited to have you here. Now I'm going to give it to Jim Lockhart, the board president for Wild Connections. Hey, Jim.
Okay, well, why do we do what we do? Well, because wildlife needs room to roam. And with climate change, which makes summers hotter, winters shorter, makes the fire season longer, even plant communities are on the move. So Wild Connections, which is soon beginning its 30th year as an organization, is an environmental organization that helps to make that movement possible. Our area of focus is the Upper Arkansas South Platte watersheds. And this is an area that is particularly heavily impacted by human impacts. We're one of the fastest growing areas in, I think, probably the entire country. And so it's important, because of the impacts of increasing human use and the habitat fragmentation that results, that we protect the areas that we have left. So we work to protect our part of Colorado on a landscape-wide basis, not only protecting the wild areas, but also the links between the wild areas, focusing on the corridors, what we call the wild connections that wildlife need in order to disperse and to move back and forth from season to season. So among other things, we work with public agencies to try to identify, maintain, and improve these connecting links. And part of what we do is by removing barriers to wildlife movement. For example, if you remove and revegetate an old road, what was once 2 smaller roadless areas becomes 1 larger one. And otherwise, however, often I think restoring the wild connection requires a lot more of that. And that's really where rewilding comes in and overlaps with our work.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And thank you so much for everything you've done for our region and for Wild Connections. Really excited to now introduce John Sztukowski, our co-executive director for conservation at Wild Connections. Welcome, John.
Hi, thanks, India, and hello, everyone. So I've been with Wild Connections for 11 years now. I'm based out of West Cliff, Colorado. I've kind of been in these small mountain towns along the Arkansas River the last 10 or so years. I got my start with Wild Connections around the Bureau of Land Management was doing a plan revision, and the BLM manages a lot of public land in this region, a lot of it well underrepresented as far as protections go, but a lot of public land along the Arkansas River on both sides, kind of from Salida to Canyon City, the north of Canyon City in the Gold Belt region, and just a really neat area that kind of goes from 5,000-6,000 feet at the Arkansas River up to maybe 10,000-11,000 feet. You get some high montane grasslands, you get into some bristlecone pine and mixed pines, not what you quite think of for BLM lands, but these are kind of right here in our backyard. And as the others have echoed, these are kind of our last few wild places in the region. And and from Wild Connections perspectives, that our 30-year history, we've identified a lot of the core areas for protection, whether that be Forest Service or BLM. We saw a lot of good interim or a lot of good recent protections in the BLM planning effort, a lot of local protections in this region, in Fremont County and Chaffee County and Huerfano County and South Park. And we're continuing on with advocacy around these areas. We do restoration projects, partnering with other organizations and the Forest Service and the BLM, as Jim mentioned, to to restore these lands back to their natural areas, especially areas that have been identified as roadless and otherwise core areas for wildlife habitat and connectivity. And so we lead hikes and monitoring projects, previous projects to these areas on public lands. We have a newer project around climate resilience and kind of as India mentioned, is identifying areas that will be good for flora and fauna in the future as we do face a changing climate. I'll kind of leave it there because I'm sure we'll pick up on a lot of this as we move along in the conversation.
Yeah, now opening up the floor to our speakers here, since we have some vivacious and robust and conversations. So we're here to focus on what is rewilding in Colorado. What is the future of our wildlife habitats? What does that look like for us? And how do we make an impact on that?
Well, I can start by just saying, this is a sort of common refrain whenever I am talking to Coloradans, but I think we are now living in a time when it's appropriate to expect that our elected leaders actually are prioritizing conservation. You don't need to be a scientist, right? I'm not a scientist. I actually studied English when I went to college. But you don't need to be a scientist to see the value of and the beauty of what we have here in Colorado. And so that's sort of that's a secondary mission of mine also is to find organizations like Wild Connections and lift them up and highlight the incredible work they're doing, but also to encourage voters to make this an issue they care about, and therefore get candidates for office to talk about these issues.
Yeah, Marlon's totally correct about that. We've got to get the word out to the public, and all the great things that have happened in the recent, the current administration, in terms of wolverines and the pollinator bill, wildlife overpasses, for example. And it's amazing to me. Well, I shouldn't say that. I used to say it's amazing to me how a lot of people don't know about these things, but a lot of people know about a lot of things that I don't know about. It's just that I immerse myself in this stuff. It seems like 24/7, as Marlon does. And that notion of connectivity, I think, is really, really important, because people don't realize how just a minor, what looks to be minor to us, a road, a little path, can change the movement patterns of countless animals, insects, even large animals. And I think that as a field biologist and an ethologist, I think of rewilding as bringing back species who used to live here. It's not the only thing we can do, and it's not, in effect, it doesn't really have to be done. But the wolves and the wolverines, for example. And so I think those are. And the pollinator bill, which I think, people say, well, what do you get so excited about it? And like you all have been saying, it's because they're far more important than these charismatic megafauna. I mean, they really are, And in fact, if you look at insects, which I spend a lot of time doing, for example, they're beautiful. I mean, you look at the 8 eyes of a spider, or just a bee just flying around flowers. But I think the connectivity thing is really important, because it's so easy to destroy those interconnections, development, a condo, a home, I mean, whatever. And I understand people want to do these things, but I think we really need to do them very carefully. And, I used to say to realtors around Boulder, where I live, maybe you should be telling potential buyers, especially in the mountains, perhaps, that they are going to be moving into an area where there could be bears and coyotes and foxes, for example, and cougars. That didn't go over very well. A few, or, make it clear to them that they need to adapt to the presence of these animals, especially if they have companion animals or kids or for their own safety, because you're taking away their connectivity and you're going to change their travel patterns.
Along those lines, Mark, one of the goals of our administration has been to actually protect corridors for migratory animals who travel with the seasons or travel to find mates or travel to find food. And it's remarkable to sort of getting back to what India and Jim and John had mentioned, how fragmented our state has become. And I like something that you mentioned, Mark, which is, it triggered a memory. So I was up at Vail Pass while Summit County Safe Passages was doing a presentation on the need for wildlife crossings. And they said on the one side of the road, all sorts of animals, all different species needed to get to White River National Forest on the other side. And it was a startling statistic, but they had sort of average lengths of time that each species requires just to get across the road. And it's, north of 60 seconds, sometimes even more if they had young children, or whatever word you want to use. And there were cars going by every 10 seconds. And so what a road that we use to get from A to B effectively bisected the species. And so, there was the species on the right side and the species on the left side, they couldn't get to each other.
Yeah.
And Marlon, that's such a good point with the connectivity that the state of Colorado has done with overpasses and underpasses. I think, speaking for myself, that's been one of the most noticeable things on the ground. Just traveling for the work I do, whether it's like I-70 or I-25 or roads like 285 between Salida and Buena Vista. It's so noticeable and impressive. Just miles long projects to not only benefit wildlife, which is I think the forefront of why we're here, but also I'm sure a lot of the impetus was to benefit driver safety, and so it was just a win-win. And now that it's been a few years since that has been passed, it is becoming more noticeable on the ground, and kind of in that thread, just seeing the state of Colorado kind of as a leader on these things. And we work a lot on public lands, and starting to see like BLM Colorado, they did a big game resource management plan amendment kind of based on the rules and regulations that the state of Colorado put in place on oil and gas leasing, and to kind of match those, those more not necessarily stringent, but more smart guidelines to not have all uses in all places, to have areas that will benefit wildlife, but also areas that in industry can still do get the resources as well.
Yeah, and discussions like this are really important to me as an ethologist or an animal behaviorist, because it, like what Marlon was saying, it explains to people that, it's not like us. We stop and we look and we walk across the road. Bad road crossings, not only due to fatalities from cars, but they can really break up family groups. And a lot of these animals who live around here in Colorado and elsewhere, of course, are highly social family living creatures. There's the parents and their children, and there might be aunts and uncles and older siblings. And people don't realize how these the lack of these corridors and the fragmentation can break these groups up. And when you break the groups up, they not only suffer, if you will, and grieve the loss of family members, but you could be breaking up reproductive groups, and so it's a snowball effect. And to me, wildlife crossings or underpasses are just they're no-brainers, and they're so easy to do because you can build something over a highway or put a tunnel under it. I don't think it's asking for too much, and that is not only part of rewilding ourselves in terms of knowledge, and it's something that I'm shocked that a lot of people don't think about it. It's actually rewilding the animals themselves, because they didn't evolve with Highway I-70 or 285 or something like that. And sometimes people just laugh and dismiss it. No, it's really important. They evolved in rather different ecosystems, and they evolved being more free to roam and to, say, keep their families together and to avoid predators. You know, predation is just part of the natural life. And as an evolutionary biologist, I wish that there didn't have to be predators and prey, and those sorts of relationships. But that's the reality of the situation. So I always think of corridors and overpasses and underpasses as being primary in terms of facilitating the integrity of an ecosystem and the integrity of family groups.
I just tack on. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on anybody. I was also going to mention that wildlife crossings, from a government standpoint, are just such incredibly smart investments. The return is a 90% and over reduction in vehicle wildlife collisions. So if you're, as I am, an animal lover, you suddenly create a way for animals to do as their nature dictates. If you're a person who's primarily concerned about motorists on the road, you can make the argument this is protecting families and people, and it's saving money, all of the money that would be filed in insurance claims, medical expenses. And that kind of holistic thinking is also something we need to be really championing, so that people, when you show people how they're connected, that gives them their reason to care. And that's a question I always ask myself: how can I encourage people to care? And I usually do it through storytelling, but I also have a few favorite examples here, through some of the restoration or reintroduction projects that have happened over the years. One of my favorites is actually, we celebrate the return, the return in progress, I should say, of the black-footed ferret. And so I always remind anyone I'm talking to that we can't talk about the successful conservation of black-footed ferrets without talking about the conservation of prairie dogs, because the two species are entirely, ferrets are dependent on prairie dogs. Canada lynx, a species that Marc was very much involved in bringing back to the state, need snowshoe hares. And so all of these, when we see the connections, the wild connections, actually, I think I had to do a plug there. It's great. Nothing exists in isolation. And so there are benefits, however you want to look at it, whatever angle. We all benefit from acknowledging and trying to protect nature and wild places.
And Marlon's use of the word holistic is just key. I mean, I know it's vogue, and sometimes when I say it, they'll say, oh, you live in Boulder, everything's holistic, and it's all fluffs and, candles and stuff like that. But it's really true. And I think one of the great moves over it could be over 50 years, but that I'm sensing now is looking at an integrated whole, and I know, you learn this probably in third grade math or whatever, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. But it really is, because the minute you start putting pieces together, they multiply among themselves. So it's not 1 and 1 is 2, and then add a third and a fourth. It could be you add 4 things and you're really dealing with an infinite number actually of new connections and interconnections. And that's another lesson that, you know, when I talk to people about that, they don't know it, but it's not because they're dumb. They just don't make their living doing what we all feel blessed to be doing for a living because we love what we do. But there's no way that the future will be very bright unless we take a holistic, real integrated point of view. And that's the only view I can think of that leads to maintaining and increasing the integrity. And I use that word of ecosystems. And you know, it's part of going back to the past. We're not going to go back to the past. Ecosystems evolve absent animals and with animals. But to me, that was a key ingredient that happened before a lot of development years ago, was these animals had the opportunity to interact with one another or not, but they weren't prevented from interacting because of roads or people going out and killing them. I mean, people did kill them, but it was really just a more open landscape. And that's why the wild connections idea is just so valuable, because it is in a sense returning to the past, but we have to undo a lot of things that we've become very accustomed to, and people don't like being inconvenienced, but that's just too bad. We really need to realize that we've taken over the planet. And, you know, people always say that the Anthropocene is the age of humanity. We just need to live with it. And I always say it's the rage of inhumanity. And it is, because of what we've done, either intentionally or unintentionally, to the lives of other animals.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that maintaining and increasing the integrity of the landscape is very important. I believe it was E.O. Wilson and some other of the wildlife biologists that discovered what they called the island effect. That you know, they looked at islands of various sizes, and the larger the island, the more species it had on it. Because just as an example, you know, a deer can live on a smaller island, but to have a population of tigers feeding on the deer requires a much larger area for them to roam through. And so it's very important, you know, that we have these connections, so that, you know, when you take two small areas and you make them one large area, you're not just taking the same amount of area and combining it. You're actually creating more area in terms of wildlife movement, and it's therefore that much more valuable. And so that's one of the reasons we do what we do.
I love that example, because I was a grad student. I think it was Robert MacArthur and E.O. Wilson, island biogeography. And that was just remarkably paradigmatic, if you will. I mean, that was just a mind blower, but it's almost so obvious, you know what I mean? But that's the other thing. People will say, well, yeah, what you're doing is really obvious. And I'm thinking, well, if it's obvious to you, why are you doing the horrific things that you're doing? So that's usually a conversation stopper. But you're right about that. Excuse me, Jim, it's really an important concept, and people need to bring that back, actually. I love it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and not just thinking literal islands, but figuratively, like just like, you know, especially like in our realm, maybe like islands of a public land, and if you don't have lands protected surrounding them and connecting them to other core areas, you know, kind of applying the three C's of rewilding with cores, connectivity, and then of course carnivores, but you know, focusing on not only on the cores in our region, but also the connectivity. And just to kind of speak to that really quickly on this recent, you know, BLM planning effort, you know, a 10-year planning effort in our region. I'm going to share my screen really quick just to show everyone a map of kind of what this looks like in practice. Can y'all see that? All right, great. So this brown and orange in the center of this map, you can see that this is all BLM land. A lot of the green, all the green is Forest Service land. These hash marked areas are areas that have protections. The BLM is very recent, but you can essentially see that this large swath of BLM land that kind of connects, you know, just southwest of Colorado Springs and Pikes Peak. It connects these Front Range mountains, and then also basically to the wet mountains south of Canyon City, but then also west along the Arkansas River, north and south, connects to the Sangre de Cristos, and there's the end of the Mosquito Range and Salida and the Swatch Range, and so you can kind of see it's not just trying to get one segment of land protected, and then this long planning process. We partnered with a lot of other conservation organizations and in coordination with the sports men's and women's groups working on similar efforts to to get this host of protections. And we saw over 300,000 acres conserved as either lands with wilderness characteristics, backcountry conservation areas, or areas of critical environmental concern. And that's not even counting the wilderness study areas like Beaver Creek and Grape Creek, or the somewhat recently designated Browns Canyon National Monument in 2015. So just trying to show this larger landscape of how these different pieces fit in. And so when we're looking to do a project, for example, we have a restoration project just north of 11 Mile Reservoir coming up, and it's in this area. You can see that's in the middle of South Park. It's one of the few roadless areas, and it's seeing illegal use is kind of getting, as we talked about, it's kind of getting hugged and squeezed by a lot of use and overuse, but really just kind of paying attention to the areas seeing the most damage, and areas that CPW has excellent data and has identified for wildlife connectivity and wildlife habitat.
Yeah, the first time you showed that map a couple of months ago when we talked, it blew my mind. There's just no other word for it. Yeah.
John, also, one of the, your map reminded me of this, that because you were mentioning BLM land, Forest Service land, even in our policy, in our agency maps, we have so many different organizations in charge of land, and it becomes a patchwork. If you say, well, this is Colorado's state land, this is federal land, this is private land. And it unfortunately lends itself to that kind of thinking lends itself to fragmentation. When you have to go through all sorts of contortions to figure out which agency to talk to, or which, especially if you're a voter, and you don't spend all of your time on government websites. But one of the things that I think has been most effective, and no doubt something that Wild Connections is engaged in all the time, is sharing of information. And this is something, it was such a simple change that we did back in 2019 when Governor Polis signed an executive order directing CPW to work with the Colorado Department of Transportation, CDOT, and exchange data and exchange information so that they could better plan and decide on where crossings were necessary and where corridors were especially vital and especially at risk. And so from a government perspective, this sort of whole of government notion, like we need all of the agencies to claim a part of this work. Different agencies have different information, but when we work together and we bridge, it's funny, it's habitat connectivity between government agencies too.
Right. And fragmentation.
And fragmentation.
Yeah, I that's really valuable to hear from you, Marlon, because I never thought of it the way you're putting it, but this is BLM land, this is this land, and it's like, well, the land doesn't know that. The animals living there don't care. They don't respect those barriers. They're going to go where they want to go.
Yes.
And then it's humans who are just destroying the integrity. And that's what I mean by integrity and connectivity. That when you use that word, sometimes people look at like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I mean exactly what I mean. It's like the integrity of a wolf pack, the integrity of a flock of birds, and the integrity of a landscape. I mean,
I have one more really interesting example to share with all of you. So I was meeting with a group in Evergreen recently, and they their their county commissioners are considering building a bike park. And the bike park would clear a lot of forest land, and a lot of native species would be displaced. And I got a very interesting analysis of this from CPW and also from the Colorado Bear Coalition and other groups that sort of measure the impact of human development of wild places.
Mhm.
And it was fascinating. One of the impacts of clearing the forest and building a bike park was that all of the black bears who live in that area would suddenly be next to lodges and homes. And so it will require all of the people living in that area to change the locks on their doors or the doorknobs
Mhm.
and find new ways to keep bear. So it was going to cost the community more money because they were going to have more frequent human bear conflict. And so just, thinking in that way, you say, well, we're not just building a bike park, we're destroying a critical migration corridor. Lots of animals come through here, and now they're not going to they won't be just coming through anymore. They'll be staying. And if there's any unsecured trash, that's not going to work out for you very well.
What you're saying, Marlon, is really important, in a very speciesist framework, because if it weren't black bears and it was insects or butterflies, a lot of people would say whatever.
Yes.
And I think that that's really important, because see, that's where these magnificent carnivores, and black bears are magnificent carnivores, play a really vital role in maintaining the integrity. I mean, I'm a cyclist, and yeah, it would be nice to have a bike park, but not at the expense of the non-humans who have every right to remain there. I mean, they've already been displaced by all the homes in Evergreen and wherever else you go. So at some point, you kind of have to just say, okay, it would be nice to have, but no, we can't do that anymore, because then they'll just wind up on I-70. I mean, in a sense, they'll just go and get killed. So no, I love that example because it hits close to home, because I'm a cyclist. So,
Actually,
Yep.
oh, sorry, John, but there was a question about, what can we do? What should be done when it comes to these scenarios? Like, how can people, have a voice in this and be better educated?
That's such a great question. I mean,
Mhm.
I will leave the content of the education to the scientists and experts. But I deal with this frequently in the governor's office. People reach out because they want to do something. They want to protect their community, and they want to protect the unspoiled grandeur of what we're so fortunate to have here in Colorado.
Mhm.
And so one thing that I always encourage people to do is to actually show up. It's not the most exciting way to spend time, but to show up to city council meetings, to testify at the state capitol, to get in touch with, our executive agencies like CPW or the Department of Agriculture, or if you happen to have an animal lover in the governor's office, which we do right now.
Mhm.
I'm always happy to take on those calls and take those, try to work, act on them, do something. And so a big part of this is showing up, but it's also telling the story and making it personal. And Mark always tells me this. He says, people always want the science, and then you give them the science and they don't change their mind. So I think talking about why something matters to you personally why it matters to your community, how it's going to impact you. I mean, this bike park wasn't just going to it wasn't going to displace bears. It was also going to, or would, make it much more difficult for fire trucks to get into that area where wildfires are now a year-round risk. And for ambulances to take people on narrow roads to nearby hospitals. And so I do think there's a way to care about animals and also care about people. And I have a good friend who once said, if you're an animal lover, you're a person hater.
Oh,
And I know that's ridiculous.
That's
It's
absurd.
completely. I said, why can't you be working for everyone, you know, for the benefit of everyone? But showing up in person, which we don't do a lot of these days, but makes a big difference.
And Marlon's so right. Is I always say, and just don't take a casual no. You know, just, you know, if you're passionate about something, you may have to work really hard to find somebody, you know, who's in power, if you will, or an influencer. But I think they're out there, you know, and you've got to make the case that what you're talking about, it's not only about the present, you know, that's another thing about rewilding, you know, like saying before, you know, you need to have some wild, or you have to have some place where you can rewild. But that's what I tell people. They'll say, oh, you know, I wrote to somebody and I never heard, or they said, we'll look into it. Well, we'll look into it really means that go, you know, and stuff. And be persistent, be kind, be passionate, and be persistent. But Marlon is so correct. Stories are great. Personal stories are great, because I'm a scientist, and Marlon's right, because I've done this stuff for a really long time. And people will say, show me the science, and you show them the science, and they'll say, well, show me the science. And you're like, you're sitting there thinking, well, I already showed you the science. So it's boiling science down for the lay public. That's what you need to do. They don't need to see X and Y graphs. They don't need to see numbers. You know, what they really need to hear are personal stories. And I find in what I do, when you give people the opportunity to tell a story, they become so much more engaged. You know, I do a lot of work with dogs, and I'll go to dog parks and people will talk to me. And it's where I'm going with this is the importance of citizen science, you know, where people, I mean, I learned so much, not only about dogs, but about wolves and coyotes over the years by people who are just out there. And they'll always, or usually preface an email saying, well, this is a dumb question, or everybody knows this. And the minute I hear this is a dumb question, I brace myself, because I know it's not a dumb question. It's a question that will likely baffle me and my colleagues if we can get my colleagues out of the ivory tower and start engaging with, if you will, non-academics or normal citizens. But giving people the opportunity to tell stories is just, it's so powerful. And when people do that with me about either dogs or wolves or, you know, any animals, all of a sudden they're there. I mean, they're there. They'll say, thank you for listening or reading my story. Nobody else really gave a damn. And I'll go, but you've got to care and stuff. So storytelling is great. And the other thing that's important is, you know, like I said, is boiling down science for non-scientists, and encouraging them to share their science, their brand of science. And in all honesty, their brand of science is sometimes as valid or more than the highfalutin, number-driven, statistic-driven science. It just really is. So thanks for saying that, Marlon. I think it's critical. Yeah.
And I'll just add on that a lot of Wild Connections work is around public education and public advocacy, and using the science that's already there. There's great science that's, you know, Colorado Parks and Wildlife has, or Rocky Mountain Wild, and kind of speaking to the citizen inventory aspect of it that Mark had mentioned. You know, we were very successful in getting lands designated for conservation on the local BLM management plan by submitting our own citizen inventory reports at the proper planning stages, and as well as notifying our members and just members of the public that there are these planning periods, whether it's federal or state or local. There's planning efforts that have public commenting periods, and I have to say, at least for Colorado, I'm impressed with the agencies, actually looking at these comments, getting back to us. For example, in the BLM process, the BLM essentially only had like 1,300 acres of lands with wilderness characteristics proposed in the draft phase a few years ago. But with our reports and overwhelming public comments, I think they received the second most comments in any category, just behind fracking. And in the final draft, they went from 1,300 to over 114,000 acres protected, not to mention, another 150,000 acres of other protections. And then just one more note on the planning. So that's one thing. Just Wild Connections members can look forward to seeing the planning efforts in the region and how to get involved and how to get onto these lands. But what's also it's neat these last few years that the state has been doing, or at least through Colorado Parks and Wildlife regional partnerships initiatives, is getting everyone at the table at the beginning. So you're getting the BLM and the Forest Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, you're getting conservation and wildlife organizations, as well as recreation organizations, and a lot of these planning efforts are around. They're going to do recreation in these regions, but they're doing it smart, and they're getting input right off the bat from the Forest Service and CPW biologists, and they're they'll let them know if this is sensitive habitat for bighorn sheep. Let's find a different route, and they get a lot of respect, and it moves the planning group forward, because we know there's going to be some recreational improvements, but it's not going to be at the cost of wildlife or wildlife habitat. And also it puts into place more conservation efforts on these grounds, and especially education as well, whether it's signage or to the local public.
And Christmas counts. I know people who've been doing them every Christmas time for decades, and they find population trends, the loss of species. When I lived in the mountains for years, I saw, I was studying Western evening grosbeaks, and, we used to have flocks of hundreds. We were banding some of them. We really, and then they disappeared. They were gone, and I know people who have been doing these Christmas counts, say around Boulder, although they do them elsewhere, detecting both increases and decreases, but they're very responsible for telling you, hey, we're losing the species. Why? What's going on? And it could be a natural cycle. When we lost evening grosbeaks in the mountains, it's because aspen leaf rollers, who are their favorite food, really declined. So it was natural that they would go elsewhere, but it was alarming to have literally 1,000 of them over the summer at my house, and then the next year have 3 and stuff. So I love what you're saying about, getting the input from people. And that's part of rewilding, by the way. Coming back to rewilding is getting people out there, because that's how you rewild them. They have a story to tell, and it's an important story. And you don't, some of my colleagues would say, well, where are the data? Have they done a t-test or stuff like that? And I'm saying, you don't need a t-test. I can tell you right now that a person with a part of a brain would have known that Western evening grosbeaks disappeared from the foothills of Boulder. You don't need a PhD to know that.
We did have a question from somebody about, I live in the city, what can I do to help rewilding? And I think you're kind of touching upon that. So if you could kind of elaborate.
Can I tell
on
that story quickly, Marlon?
Yes, absolutely.
So when I wrote my book, Rewilding Our Hearts, some rewilding clubs were founded in cities, and one was in Chicago, where a woman put flowers up on the balcony of her condo, it was a big apartment building, and all of a sudden birds came and insects came. And she wrote me, and I actually talked to the people who were in this group. That was what you can do, and I can't even tell you how enthusiastic they were. I was spoiled, because When I lived in the mountains, I had cougars and bears and some coyotes at my house. But they'd never seen these birds in the city. They'd never seen these insects. And they were so enthused, and they kept saying, what can we do? And as an activist, I said, just get out there and make sure that these animals are protected. Make sure that your neighbors who say, oh my God, I went outside and I almost got stung by a bee who wasn't here. Too bad. I mean, no, seriously. So that's one thing they can do. And Jane Goodall and I did an event in Denver some years ago as part of her Roots and Shoots group. And we did it in the inner city. And these kids were experts on rodent behavior and ecology. So I was talking to this one kid. He was great. I said, like, how did this happen? It wasn't asking it because I didn't like it. He said, well, the only animals we see around here are mad dogs and rats. And so, no, seriously, Jane and I must have had hours of conversations about that because they were becoming citizen scientists of the local fauna. Mm-hmm. And so you just got to find something that really turns you on, because you've got to be excited about it. Say no to all the critics and say, well, what a waste of time to put flowers on a balcony, or look at rats. Rats are just pests. No, rats are highly social mammals who care about one another. They like being tickled, and they show compassion for rats in need. So all of a sudden, these stories come in where this one kid wrote to me and said, you know, you're right. I saw this rat kind of taking care of another rat. And I'm thinking, that's all I needed for that week. So anyway, just look around. Living in the city does not mean you cannot rewild and be involved in making more connections between condos. I mean, I don't know. I just think you got it. Like Marlon said, when you let people tell their stories, they just go and they say, no one ever listened to me. I'm going to do this. There you go. Yeah.
Also, you reminded me, Mark, of this is somewhat interesting, but something I've encountered over the last 6 years in the governor's office. Each time I've had outreach and a request for help is the idea of urban wildlife, mm-hmm. right? It exists. People associate wildlife with the wilderness, deep forests and far-flung places. But if you live in a city and you look around, you see raccoons, you see foxes and all different kinds of birds. To say nothing of the insects and the invertebrates. I know that the pandemic was such a terrible time for everyone, but there was a silver lining for me when I would take my sweet pup Gia around for walks, is all of the animals started to come out because all of the people were staying in. So we saw great blue herons, and we saw beautiful foxes walking through downtown Boulder, and it was just wonderful.
And looking at them as neighbors. So a great author named Brandon Keim just wrote a book, basically called Meet Your Neighbors. And I actually started using that word a few years ago, I think after talking to Brandon and others. And people would look at you like, neighbors? Oh, you mean humans? And I'll go, no, the animals from whose homes we stole from them, basically. And so the reason I mention that is just that jargon. I've been writing about, there's some people in England, because goals are a pain over there, talking about your neighborly goals. G-U-L-S. I mean, and Marlon's right. I mean, because I ride my bike a lot, and on 4th Street in Boulder, I would see litters of baby foxes running up and down the street playing. And people would say, well, it's a real pain, blah, blah, blah. Well, I mean, they're coming home. And that was a phrase I use. Welcome home. Welcome your non-human neighbors. But Marlon's right. I mean, the pandemic was a pain, but it did force people to if you will, rewild. I remember these pictures of my friend lives in Wales, and in this little town in Wales, there were sheep walking right down Main Street. No one had
This
ever
was all over the world, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
dolphins in Venice, you
Yeah.
know, and it's really exciting to know that we're not alone, you know, that the animals are still there. And you know, one of the
Yes.
things too, in answer, Jim, to your question, you know, what can we do? Well, first of all, people can connect through Wild Connections, right? Being a
Exactly.
member of Wild Connections is a wonderful entry point to all of these issues. At the state, you know, what we're constantly looking for are good ideas, people to tell us, you know, we want to start a project to do this in our town. For example, you know, human-bear conflict. I know I mentioned this before, but in towns where there were high numbers of conflicts, we started a grant program where you can get bear-proof trash cans. You know, and programs like that are, you know, I always tell people, don't assume that the expert is in government. You know,
nor in the university, by the way.
Right,
Yeah.
in universities or citizens who educate themselves. And I say I always want to hear good ideas, and that's my main role really, is to hear good ideas and take them back to the office with me and present them to the people who can act on them. And so that, you know, it's really powerful. People shouldn't feel disempowered by being one person or one voice.
Mm-hmm.
Never just one voice. You know, you always find there's a community of like-minded people who care about the same things.
Yeah.
I always tell people the same thing, Marlon. I'll say, if you're thinking about this, other people are thinking about this, so connect with them. And you know what? I've really never had anybody come back and say, I can't find anybody. I'm having trouble finding anybody who's interested in what I'm interested in. No, they just start talking about it over coffee or put a note out on, you know, whatever you can use. I'm not on social media, but on social media, you will find a lot of people in your community who share you, and they don't want to be the first person out there for whatever reason, but all of a sudden they feel they have company. And you're right.
There's strength in numbers.
Strength in numbers.
I also would just say too, a lot of the time I find people who care about an issue are nervous about coming to the Capitol and testifying in committee.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I emphasized, I said, all you have to do is tell your story. You don't have to know everything. You know, you don't have to be the most well-read person on the planet on this issue to express why you care. You know, it's what's easier than telling your own story.
Well, along those lines and the science, I mean, I've been told by so many people, when people go and testify or whatever they do, and they talk about biodiversity and species richness and all that, nobody listens. But when they start talking about telling their stories, which really reflect, say, a loss in biodiversity, people listen. Okay, because a lot of people have no idea what the phrase biodiversity means, or the integrity of a social, you know, an ecosystem. And I couldn't agree more with Marlon. Marlon's one of the best storytellers I've ever met, and one of the best writers of stories. And once again, like I said, when you know it, well, I am kind, but I'm being truthful with you. But really, when Marlon tells these stories, it's just like, it's so powerful. So we need to empower, if you will, the citizenship, empower people, you know. And I love when I get emails or I meet people and who say, well, no one ever listened to me, and you're listening to me. Why would a PhD in biology listen to me? And I would say, because most of the stuff I hear from my PhD colleagues is boring, okay? Or it's interesting, but they're not putting it to use. And Paul Ehrlich, who's a very famous ecologist. He wrote the book, The Population Bomb. I learned something from him when I was a younger academic, is every student has to do something that has some practical bent. You have to do it. So you can study theoretical social biology of carnivores or whatever. You've got to do something on the ground. And
Yeah.
I love that model. And of course, in academics, I used to get criticized. Well, I mean, so you're doing this. What does it have to do with academics? And I'm thinking, well, I mean, it's got to do with engaging people, connecting people and stuff. So I
Taking it off
couldn't.
the shelf.
What's
And
that?
taking it off the shelf and turning it into an action.
Turning it into an action that could actually make a difference.
And imagine that.
Yeah,
But
get over this academic arrogance. Get over the political arrogance. And I just say be a pain, but be nice and be positive. And once again, the way we started, be proactive. If we wait too long, there ain't going to be anything to rewild. We'll be rewilding, alleys and Highway 36 or something. Wow.
Yeah,
This is wonderful.
I'll say some of them.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You took the words right out of my mouth, Mark. But yeah, I know we're a few minutes over here, so I'm
Whatever.
Okay, great. I mean, if there's any closing remarks you guys have, I feel, this has been a really, really great discussion. I know that I feel, inspired by it. I feel like every time, we're saying every time we have discussions like this, I learn a little bit more, and it inspires me to go be a little more active. And I already work at Wild Connections, so. But,
you are active. Just stop complaining. That's what I tell people. And I don't mean that in a negative way, because, and you don't have to found a movement. Those are the sorts of things that I get, especially in animal protection. You don't have to found a movement. You just find something about which you're deeply passionate. Don't never say never, because it's such an easy put off. And I love working with youngsters. I mean, Marlon's probably heard this story of like a teenage girl in New York who wants to close down the Bronx Zoo. This fourth grader who has completely changed his family to vegetarian because he read something about cows. He didn't know that a bacon and lettuce and tomato sandwich was a babe lettuce and tomato sandwich. And that was it. And I don't even mean that as an activist sort of way. He had no idea. So I talked to him and his parents, and they've made this changes. And this little kid living in rural Kentucky contacted me. He loves rodents. He loves mice. So he sent me an email, and it could have come from a college student. He wanted to know about habitat use. So his father, who's in construction, built an outdoor enclosure. And this kid, he's 14 years old or whatever, came up with these experiments that were fully controlled, and he learned something. So I think that the other side of the coin is get to the youngsters, get to them, empower them, and listen to them. And some of my colleagues would blow them off. Well, what do they know? I'm going to tell you, they know a lot more than you do in the practical world. So it's not being anti-science. I love science. It's more putting to use what we know. And Paul Ehrlich's model of having his graduate students doing something that has utility to the real world, I think, is a good message.
Yeah, that's a really good message, Mark. That is the MO for government too. Every time I start to sort of dream of what we could do in the abstract, I always need to come back down, because someone always says, okay, but what do you want to do? What is your plan? Give us a plan, give us what needs to change, making it practical. I was also going to say, on that topic, if you do care about something, and I encourage everyone to ask that question of themselves, why should I care? I think it's extreme not to care. A lot of the time we hear that, oh, you care about wildlife, or you care about farm animals, or you care about companion animals. You're an extremist. Not caring is extreme. Indifference is extreme, right? And so finding your reason for caring, finding why, answering that question, how am I connected, rather than how am I not connected, which is sort of what we do by default these days. And I couldn't agree more about kids. I am amazed by kids. When I visited a few classrooms, and I was actually visiting a school in Evergreen, and one of the kids, he was a second grader, had studied wolves in depth. I mean, he rose his hand and had more to say than I think anyone who I've talked to at any agency. And he was a riot too, because he came up to me after the presentation and he said, I have more that I have to talk to you about. So I'm going to come to the Capitol and you and I will have a meeting. And I said, great. I love that. I love the enthusiasm. But he meant it. He meant it. And he also asked for a wildlife crossing in his town because he said, I'm so sick of seeing animals who tried to get across and they were hit by a car. Why can't we fix this? I said, it's true. Why can't we? The answer is we can. And I'm going to go back to the office and tell everyone that town needs a crossing. One last thing that I wanted to mention, because we love to focus at the macro level, but I was talking to a friend at the Butterfly Pavilion the other day about efforts that are underway in La Junta to create wildlife crossings for the tarantulas who are dispersing in search of mates. And I said, how wonderful, to think on that level. It's not just as you said, Mark, the really charismatic megafauna. It's the spiders and the invertebrates and the little guys.
I love that because tarantulas, I think they're beautiful, but a lot of people think they're ugly. But tarantulas have a right to life too. They have a right to reproduce. They're social. They have children. They form families. And the use of words, because Marlon and I talk about this all the time with his English background, is the words we use are so important. They're just, so I used to get criticized for naming animals, but now most journals allow you to name animals, for example. I started using, you have a pair between, say, among wolves. You've got a father and a mother, a husband and a wife. They form long-term pair bond, and they have children, not young, not offspring. And it really changes the conversation. And just 2 years ago, I wrote an article for a magazine, and they said, well, only humans have children. And I would go, really? I mean, if that's not anthropocentric, what is? So the words we use, and when I work with kids, I always say, I want you to start calling animals who, not it, not which, not that, or whom. And it's incredible how it changes the dialogue, and how they talk with one another. It is effortless to talk to an 8 or 10-year-old and say that dogs love their kids, their children. It's effortless. It's the adults who go, well, we don't really know that. And I'm thinking, I'm glad you don't love me. That's what I always say. I mean, it's effortless. So I do agree, that we've got to work with all age groups. In Roots and Shoots, I've worked with people at an assisted living community in Boulder who were between 90 and 100 years old, and they loved it, and they had kids and grandkids and great grandkids, and stuff. So I don't think we want to leave out any sector. And like I said, that story that, you know, Jane and I going into the inner city, if you will, of Denver, work with them. There's just so many people out there who are starving to learn about animal behavior and reconnecting and rewilding. You know, and like Marlon said, you know, and I don't mean it in any superficial way, and about wild connections. You know, it's not only connecting the landscape, it's connecting human beings to one another and human beings to non-humans. And as Marlon, this example of the tarantula, I love, I'll have to write something on it. It's connecting animals to animals.
Well, and it's just, it's kind of heartwarming, you know, and
Yeah.
I think, yeah, you know, the last thing that I want to say is that everyone watching should follow Wild Connections,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and follow the incredible work that you guys are doing around the state. And I'm looking forward to continuing to learn from the work that you guys are doing, and we can craft policies around it. We can use the data that you collect and the stories you have. This is what's exciting. This is when government actually can be helpful.
Rare, but they can be.
It is rare.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it was so great at this event when I met India. And I mean, honestly, I'd thought about a lot of these things, but I'd never thought about them in the context of what we talked about when we got together in June. And now I've never thought about them like that. And I mean, I wrote a book called Rewilding Our Hearts, and it was a different sort of rewilding. But the basis, the subtitle is Building Corridors of, you know, Connection. I can't remember the subtitle, but it doesn't matter. But it's building corridors. And the whole model of the rewilding carnivores, because I study carnivores, was the model for that, the connectivity, connect your heart to your actions.
Sorry, you guys heard my very loud partner.
Bring 'em
Which
in.
means that I'm being summoned away. I wish I could stay all night.
No, thank you so much, Marlon. We totally understand it. You know, this has been a really fantastic conversation, you know, and it started from your amazing event, you know, back in May, and all the partnerships that really do exist, you know, that there are a lot of organizations and a lot of people and folks out there who are invested in this, and we need to connect a little bit more so that we can move rewilding forward, so we can make sure that there is a future for our wildlands and our wildlife and for the state that we love. So really, really appreciate all the work you do to bring us all together. And really, you see the connections, and they're so vital. So we really, really appreciate your support and for speaking. And like I said, it's great to learn from you. And we're so happy to have your support at Wild Connections.
Yeah.
I am so excited to know
second.
you guys. And yes, that's what they tell me. First gentlemen are conveners. That was what they said. Your chief responsibility is to convene. And I said, great. Convening
First
I can
convener. I love that.
First convener. I said, what else am I for? You know,
I'll give you 5 stars on Google. So
yeah.
I love it. I'll take it where I can get it.
That's great. And please thank the governor for his support of all this. I can't even put in words how critical it is. And we don't got a lot of time. That's not good English, but we don't got a lot of time. So thank you all. This is great.
Yes,
Thank
thanks everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
yeah. So we'll let you go, Marlon. But you know, as we wrap up over here, I wanted to thank everyone who is joined us today. And it's truly, there's a commitment to protecting Colorado's wildlife and our wildlands, and just showing up here today. You know, we know that you're passionate about it, and we hope that you gain something from this, some insights, and you know, more ways in which you can connect. And Wild Connections is we actually have a outing this Saturday. I'll let John talk about that a little bit more, along with our restoration project. So
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you.
I'm going to jump.
Yeah,
but
I can
send-
stay a minute if you want.
Yes, please send me about the field trip, and I will share that on my Facebook page.
Appreciate that. Yeah. So John, if you want to talk about our upcoming outings
Thanks.
and
Oh,
project
Yeah,
briefly.
you bet. It just kind of sum up the last like 15 minutes or so of conversation from our side. It's just, you know, a lot of the work we do is to try to keep these lands and places and wildlife intact for future generations. And, you know, some of the biggest wins that we've seen, you know, as far as wild connections in our region has been when the local public, local landowners, the community gets involved, and whether it's just writing a public comment, when those add up, those that's the power that shuts down some bad projects or otherwise that's going to, you know, impede some of these last remaining wild places that deserve protections. And kind of with that said, as I mentioned at the top, Wild Connections partners with the Forest Service on restoration projects every year. This Saturday, we're heading into one of our former projects at Rock Creek, just outside the Lost Creek wilderness area. We're doing a monitoring next month, kind of similar up at the Terriall Creek. And in October, we're doing a restoration project partnering with the Forest Service just north of 11 Mile Reservoir. And as we kind of talked about other ways to get involved, Forest Service South Platte Ranger District for years now, every year around this time has been doing montane skipper butterfly surveys that Wild Connections usually participates in. It really starts next week for the next 2 weeks that you can get involved just southwest of Denver and Boulder. We'll have a Wild Connections Day there in a couple of weeks. Yeah, it's really neat. And then they have that data, of course, year after year. Their biologist, Michael Painter, has been awesome up there. And then of course we have virtual events like this throughout the year, and then just otherwise outings to areas of importance for wildlife or for the lands. We're starting a partnership with BLM for a wildlife to benefit wildlife on an old fence removal project in the region, and kind of focusing on, again, our core areas and corridors that we've been working to protect for the last 30 years.
No, it's great. I mean, you know, I still see there's still a good number of people in the audience, but yeah, this is it's just so important to bring people together. You know, it's not because they're dumb, it's not because they're disconnected. I mean that, you know, it's just they just don't have access to the things we have access to, and it's really of paramount importance for us to do the connecting. I mean, it just is. You know, sometimes it's hard, and sometimes you go, God, I wish I could do this. You know, it don't matter. Don't look at the results. Just keep going. Just put it out there. Keep going. Don't take no for an answer. And every now and again, you'll find a person who can help you along in one or many different ways. So thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. You know, and it's so great to have your insight and just your experience speaking on these issues. And like you said, it's now, and that's really what we need to focus on, so that there is something to rewild in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an optimist, but it's the reality. The reality is that, you know, we just don't. I know the word sustainable is used all the time, and it's overused in some ways, but it's true. You know, more mouths to feed, more people out enjoying their environs wherever they live, in the city, in the country, you know, really rural. So we just can't do what we used to do because there's just too many of us, and that's just the way it goes, you know. And you don't want to get to a point of no return, and you know, we can't steal. We shouldn't be stealing I don't even know the life, you know, stealing the future of young kids right now. You know, and that's what we're selfishly doing. And I mean, I don't mean we necessarily, but you know, to some extent, that's what's happening. You know, and if you got kids, you better be maybe on double duty to make sure I guess I would put it now that there's things for them to enjoy and rewild. So
Yeah. No, that's
anyway, great.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much, John and Jim.
Yeah.
It's really great that we could host this event. And, you know, Wild Connections is, we focus on rewilding, but we also love to educate people, and we would love your support. And we have a lot of ways that you can get involved. And please just go check out our website, wildconnections.org. And you can learn more about our volunteer opportunities, also about our upcoming hikes, and ways to support our really important restoration projects coming up in October, as well as where you can see us live and in the flesh on the ground somewhere around, you know, the Colorado region. So once again, thank you so much to everyone for joining us for this very, very important conversation today. And
will this be put out so people can listen?
absolutely.
Yeah, I actually just got 2 texts from people, and one I thought, well, it's important, but they said I missed it, and then 2 others loved it. I mean,
It's
really,
recording. That's great. I'm glad some people loved it. So, and I'm glad some people stuck around too.
no,
Yeah.
no. This is good stuff. I'm sorry, not because I'm here or Marlon was here, but this is good stuff. This is really important stuff, and it's so easy to listen to. You know what I mean? And so I'm going to send it to thousands of people when it gets posted and stuff. But yeah, I just got one, and I just got a bunch of text in from people who were here and said they loved the wide range. They never thought about a lot of the things we were talking about today in terms of just a wild connection. They just had, and once again, they're not dumb people. They just had never had the context to do it. And that's another thing we need to do, is we need to just put it out there. Never stop putting it out there.
Definitely more open conversations, and also, as you spoke about, dialogue and terms that resonate.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, yes, the event has been recorded, and anyone who registered, and even if they couldn't attend, we will be, you know, cleaning up the video a little bit, and then we will have it available for people to view. So,
But for
yeah,
anybody,
out
correct?
there.
I mean,
Yeah.
not only people who were
Yeah.
here. Yeah,
Anyone
okay.
who wants to watch it, they can watch it on their phone, their laptop, their big screen, wherever you can view it. It'll be available. So we'll be getting that up, you know, well, not probably right now because we're still doing this, but yes, once the recording is available, it'll be out there for the public to watch, and super excited to share it since this is a very important conversation.
Cool. No, seriously, I'm here, and it's going bing, bing, bing. I actually have no sounds on my phone, including the ringer usually. So, but it's coming in. I loved it. When will it appear? Thanks for bringing in the importance of individual animals in. And one said, I'd never thought about all these wild connections.
Amazing.
There you go.
Right back to the home.
Anyway,
Yeah.
well, thank you. Thank you for all this. And I hope you all come to Boulder someday and we can all just chat.
Absolutely. We love
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
thanks so much, Mark.
Yeah, no, my
Thank you, Mark.
pleasure. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Yeah. Anyone who's attended today, please feel free to reach out. You know, our information is on the wildconnections.org page. And I know we have some of his information up too on our website. And of course, Marlon, you can find him most places as a public figure.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. Well, have a good evening, you all, and
Yes.
we'll be in touch.
Have a great evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.